Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Nightfall Terrors. I know many of you enjoy using these videos to help you fall asleep, so before you start to drift off, it would be great if you could leave a comment sharing where you're listening from around the world. If you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Now, let's get cozy, settle in, and begin. It was meant to be a short afternoon hike. I reached the trailhead later than planned, around 3:30, but figured I had enough time to walk a few miles, maybe catch the sunset from the ridge, and head back before it got too dark. I wasn't planning to go far, just enough to get away from road noise and cell reception. I'd done this loop once before, but never from this particular trailhead. The path cuts through a thick part of the forest, mostly pine, lots of underbrush, with occasional sun filtering through. It was quiet, not calm quiet, but vacant. No breeze, no birdsong. I remember thinking how strange that was. About 45 minutes in, I came across a narrow offshoot trail I didn't recognize. It wasn't marked, but it looked recently traveled. The grass was pushed down. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to follow it. I'm not sure why I did. Maybe just curiosity. The trail dipped sharply downhill and curved around a group of large boulders. Around 10 minutes later, I caught the faint scent of smoke. Not strong, just that light, woody smell you get when someone nearby has a fire going. I assumed there were campers close by, but here's what felt off. There was no sound, no voices, no dogs, no rustling, just the smell. And when I turned the corner, I saw it. A small clearing nestled tightly between trees, just big enough for 2 tents. A fire pit sat in the middle with glowing embers. No flames, just orange coals and a thin line of smoke drifting straight up, still warm, but there was no one around. Both tents were unzipped and open. A small blue cooler, a red thermos knocked on its side, 2 camping chairs. One had a hoodie hanging on the back, like someone had just taken it off. On the log near the fire, a phone, screen up, no case, carefully placed, not dropped. Next to it, a wallet. Looking around, I spotted another phone propped against a backpack, and a second wallet sitting on top of the cooler. 2 pairs of shoes outside one tent. Still, not a person in sight. Not in the tents, not in the trees, not on the trail. I called out just once. Hey! No reply. I should have left then. But it was like my mind needed a moment to fully process how wrong everything felt. I kept scanning the campsite, expecting a note, or for someone to pop out, laughing, some kind of prank, but nothing changed. The fire was still warm, so they couldn't have been gone long. Maybe 20 minutes, less. I stepped closer to the tents, trying to make sense of it. In one, I saw a sleeping bag half open, some clothes bunched near the bottom. In the other, a paperback lying face down on a pillow. I checked the phones. One had a cracked screen and a dead battery. The other lit up when I tapped it. The lock screen showed a photo, 2 women in their 20s, smiling. The time read 5:12 p.m. A message notification on the screen read, "Where are you guys?" That's when it really hit me. Someone was expecting them. Someone was waiting for a response. The silence grew heavier. I focused, trying to hear anything. Still nothing, not even wind. I glanced up and suddenly felt that eerie sensation, like someone was watching. No sound, no movement, just that prickling on your neck. I turned. Nothing. I told myself maybe they stepped out looking for signal. Maybe they wandered off and would be back any minute. But people don't leave barefoot with their wallets, phones, and fires still burning. Something was wrong. I backed away, slow and quiet. I didn't know why I was being so careful, just instinct. I didn't want to turn my back on the sight, but standing there felt worse. I edged back into the trees, then turned and walked fast up the trail. Not quite running, but close. The path back felt longer than it had on the way in. I kept checking over my shoulder. Nothing there. But I knew something was following. Then I heard it. Something stepping through the underbrush about 50 feet off the trail. Not a deer, too deliberate. Step, pause, step, then stillness. I stopped, held my breath. Silence. I moved again, quicker now. Just before I reached the boulders, I passed a tree with 3 clean gouges in the bark, right at eye level, like tally marks. Could have been claws or a knife. I didn't stop to check. As soon as I hit the main loop trail, I jogged. Still no signal, so I just kept moving toward my car. The trail didn't feel the same. Trees seemed different in the fading light. Shadows stretched farther, and that dead silence was back. The kind that messes with your head, makes you think you're hearing things. About a quarter mile from the trailhead, I heard footsteps behind me. Steady, measured, the kind of pace someone uses when they're trying to stay quiet, but not invisible. Stopped. So did the steps. I turned. Nothing. No movement. No birds. Just heavy silence. I took a few steps backward, eyes on the path, then turned and jogged again. I only looked back once, when I saw my car, still the only vehicle in the lot. But just before I reached it, I noticed something near the trail map. A man, standing behind the signpost, not hiding, not moving, wearing dark clothes, hoodie pulled up. He didn't say a word. I didn't either. Just unlocked the car, got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. He didn't move. I pulled out fast, drove until I had cell service again, and called the ranger station. Told them everything, what I saw and didn't see. They said they'd send someone out and asked if I could meet them back at the trailhead. I said no. A few days later, I checked the local news. No missing persons, no reports, nothing. But I know what I saw, and I won't be going back. It was my 3rd night out. I'd driven about 5 hours north for a solo camping trip, something I'd done a few times before. The area wasn't completely remote, but it was quiet. No signal, and the closest parking lot was 2 miles down the trail. I found a flat clearing about 30 feet from a small stream. It wasn't an official site, but it had a stone fire ring and a couple logs someone had dragged over to sit on. I hadn't seen anyone all day. No other tents along the trail. I spent the afternoon reading in my hammock, filtered water, made dinner. It was a perfect late summer evening, still warm but cooling off fast. Just as the sun dipped, I started a fire. Not long after, I heard footsteps on the trail. Steady, not rushed. Whoever it was didn't seem lost. I sat on a log by the fire, watching. A man stepped into the clearing. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, then at the fire, and walked over to the other log. Sat down, no wave, no greeting. No, mind if I sit? Nothing. He looked mid to late 30s, maybe early 40s. Scruffy, short hair, a little sunburned. Khaki pants, gray t-shirt, small day pack. I waited for him to speak. He didn't. Just stared into the fire, face blank. After a few seconds, I said, "Hey," no reply. He didn't even look at me, just kept watching the flames. I tried again. Long hike. Still nothing. One slow blink. That's it. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. People don't act like that. He didn't seem drunk or high. No swaying. No slurred speech. Just vacant. I stood up, grabbed my water bottle, and walked over to my tent. Pretended I needed something. Stepped inside, stood for a moment. He didn't move. I came back out and stood by the fire again, this time farther from him. Maybe he was just strange or dealing with social anxiety. I didn't know, but I didn't want him sticking around. Camping nearby? I asked. No answer. He barely blinked. Just sat there with his arms resting on his knees, watching the fire like he'd been doing it for hours. I thought about asking him to leave, but something about him felt off. I didn't want to provoke a reaction. Eventually, I said, "Well, I'm turning in soon." Still nothing. I walked to my tent and zipped it shut. I sat inside, listening. No movement. After about 10 minutes, I unzipped the door just slightly and peeked out. He was still there, same posture, same empty stare. I lay down on top of my sleeping bag with my boots on, just in case. The fire started to fade. The sky went dark. His shadow stayed visible on the side of my tent. Still didn't move. Eventually I drifted off, not really asleep, just in that half-alert state where your body's tired, but your mind's still awake. Sometime in the night, I woke up, no reason, just opened my eyes. His shadow was gone. I listened. Nothing. Then, snap, a twig behind the tent. Not loud, like something lightly stepped on it. I sat up, unzipped the flap just a bit, and looked out. He wasn't by the fire anymore. I scanned the clearing, couldn't see much. The moon was low, the fire just glowing ash. I reached into my pack, slowly pulled out my flashlight, turned it on, and swept it around the trees. Nothing. But then I saw it. On the ground near where he'd been sitting. A circle of 6 small stones, neatly arranged. That hadn't been there earlier. I stared at it for a while, then zipped the tent back up. I didn't sleep after that, just lay there in the dark, holding my knife, flinching at every small sound. Branches creaking, leaves shifting, the occasional owl. But no voices, no more footsteps, and no sign of where he went. When daylight finally came, I stepped outside. The ring of stones was still there, but now a 7th one sat in the center. I packed quickly, skipped breakfast, skipped coffee. I rolled up the tent in a rush and shoved it into my bag. The whole time, I kept scanning the woods, half expecting to see him standing there again. But I didn't. I left everything else, fire pit, logs, exactly as I'd found it, and got out fast. I didn't run, mostly because I didn't want to appear scared if he was still nearby. But I moved quickly, glancing back every few minutes. About half a mile down the trail, I noticed footprints veering off into the woods. They weren't deep, but they were fresh, heading away from the trail. I didn't follow them, just kept moving until I reached the parking lot. My car was still the only one there. I got in, locked the doors, and drove straight home. I never filed a report, didn't know what I'd even say. Technically, nothing happened. but I've never felt that unsettled by another person before in my life. It was sometime after 2 a.m. when I woke up. I didn't check the exact time right away, just knew it was still pitch black outside and oddly silent. Not even insects. I was camping alone at a remote spot I'd discovered a couple of years earlier, way out in the national forest. It's not on any official maps, but if you follow a narrow path past a dry creek, there's a little clearing surrounded by pine. I'd never seen anyone else out there, which was part of why I liked it. I just needed to unplug from work, from people, from noise. The first 2 nights were uneventful. Perfect weather, total solitude. I hadn't heard or seen a soul, not even tire tracks near the forest road on my way in. On the 3rd night, I lit a small fire, made rice and beans, read a few pages, and turned in early, probably around 9:30. I left the rain fly off the tent to let air circulate. It was warm, and I liked looking up at the trees. The zipper on the door was right by my head. I woke up because I was cold, not freezing, but that deep chill that creeps in once the fire's gone out. I sat up and reached for a hoodie I'd left near my sleeping bag. That's when I noticed the tent flap, unzipped about 2 feet down, just hanging open. What really stood out was that the zipper pull was inside the tent, right next to me, as if it had been undone from inside and left there. I was certain I'd zipped it all the way up before bed. I'm meticulous about that, especially out here. I always double-check just to avoid bugs, or worse. I sat there frozen for a few seconds, listening. Still no wind, no insects. Just silence pressing in from every side. I slowly reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and swept the inside of the tent. Everything looked normal. My pack, boots, the book I'd been reading. No rips in the mesh, no signs of anything else. I leaned forward and peeked out through the flap. Nothing but darkness and trees. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling. The zipper was bent slightly, like it had been tugged too hard. I knew I hadn't left it like that. I remembered sealing it tight, checking the corners of the tent before getting in. I zipped it back up slowly, my ears straining for sound. That's when I noticed my boots. They weren't where I'd left them. I'd taken them off and placed them neatly outside, toes pointing away. Now they were turned inward, facing the tent, like someone had picked them up and put them back down incorrectly. I hadn't heard anything while sleeping. No twigs snapping, no footsteps. But the boots had clearly been moved. My heart was racing, but I tried to stay rational. Told myself maybe I bumped them when I got up. Maybe the zipper slipped. Even though I knew better, I sat with the flashlight on, just listening. Eventually, I lay back down, but I didn't really sleep. Kept the flashlight in my hand, zipper fully closed. Checked it again after 20 minutes. Then I heard something. Not close, somewhere out in the woods. A faint crack, like a stick snapping underfoot. Then, silence. A minute later, another sound. Farther off, not an animal. Animals don't walk like that. 2 steps, pause, 2 more. It sounded like someone trying to move quietly. I sat up, holding the flashlight like a weapon. Turned it off. Listened. Nothing then. Another step. This one closer. Slid out of my sleeping bag and crouched near the door, peering through the narrow gap between tent fabric and ground. Darkness. No movement. I reached for my knife, just a basic folding one I carry for camp tasks. Not meant for protection, but it was the only thing I had. That next hour was one of the longest I can remember. Every few minutes I thought I heard something, a breath, a faint shift, but couldn't tell if it was real or just nerves. At some point I must have dozed off sitting up because I woke with a jolt to faint morning light filtering through the tent. I scrambled out right away. My boots were gone. I spun around thinking maybe they'd just been moved again. But no, they weren't there. I searched the whole clearing, circled the tree line, checked the brush. Nothing. Then I saw the footprints. Bare feet, about 10 feet from the tent. Just 2 prints in soft dirt. Like someone had stepped forward, stood still for a moment, then stepped back. No other tracks in or out. I packed up in under 10 minutes, skipped breakfast, shoved everything into my pack, hiked the full 2 miles, back to the trailhead in socks. Didn't see anyone, not on the trail, not in the parking area, not on the drive out. When I got home, I checked again for the boots. Thought maybe I'd stashed them somewhere weird in my rush. Still, nothing. I have no idea how someone got that close without waking me up, or why they didn't take anything else, or why they would unzip the tent from inside, unless they were actually in there at some point. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. It was supposed to be a 3-day solo hike. I'd done it before, same area. Not deep wilderness, but remote enough that there's no service, and rarely anyone around once you leave the main trail. I'd found a small flat spot near a ridgeline about a year ago. No signs of previous use. No trash, no fire rings. Just peaceful. I figured I'd head back for a quiet weekend. I parked Friday morning and hiked in. Weather was good, the trail uneventful. About an hour in, I veered onto a side path I'd marked on my GPS. A narrow, rocky route that eventually opens near my preferred clearing. I remembered a specific pine tree by the ridge line. When I saw it, I knew I was close. That's when I noticed the camera. A trail cam, camo-colored, like hunters use, was strapped to a tree, maybe 30 yards from where I'd planned to set up. Not hidden particularly well, just mounted at chest height and pointed straight at the clearing. Oh, small LED panel, black lens, no blinking lights, just there. I looked around. No other gear nearby. No blinds, no bait stations. Just the one camera. I know it might have been for wildlife, but it still felt off. This wasn't a hunting zone, and there were no posted notices. In all the times I'd been up there, I'd never seen another person. The camera was pointed directly at the spot where I usually pitched my tent. That bothered me more than I expected. I thought about turning back, but I'd taken the time off, packed all my gear, planned meals, figured I'd stay one night, and if things felt off, I'd leave. So I kept going. I set up near the edge of the slope, as usual, with a view of the trees below. I couldn't see the camera from there, but I knew it had a clear view of me. That first night was normal. Made noodles, sat on a log, watched the sky, heard an owl or two, nothing else, slept fine. It was the second day that things started to shift. I went exploring that morning, making a wide loop to check out some new game trails. About a mile out, I spotted another trail cam. This one was better concealed, mounted higher, behind some branches. Same style as before, camo pattern, same lens. It was aimed at a planned part of the trail. No water, no sign of wildlife. When I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The tree bark below it had scuff marks, like someone had recently climbed to adjust it. The ground beneath was disturbed, not heavily, but enough to show fresh impressions. No boot prints, just smoothed down dirt, like someone had erased their tracks. That was enough to put me on edge. I went back to camp and debated packing up, but it was still early. I told myself it might mean nothing. I made some lunch, sat around reading. Later, I turned on my phone to check the time. I'd kept it off most of the trip to save battery. That's when I saw a strange notification. A Bluetooth device was trying to connect. It didn't say what device, just that something was nearby. Then it disappeared. I wasn't using Bluetooth gear. No earbuds, no speakers, nothing. The message came back a few minutes later, then vanished again. I walked at the edge of camp with my phone out, scanning. Nothing. The alert only popped up when I got close to where I'd seen the first camera. That night I didn't sleep as soundly. Every noise made me sit up, rustling leaves, creaking branches. I kept imagining someone out there, just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. I knew I was probably just psyching myself out, but I kept my knife nearby and left my boots on when I got in the sleeping bag. Around 1 a.m., I woke up and noticed a faint glow on one side of the tent, soft and flickering, not like moonlight, but warmer. I peeked outside and saw a light through the trees, maybe 50 feet away. It looked like a flashlight or a phone screen, just out of full view. Then it went dark. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening hard. A twig snapped, close. Then another. Someone was out there, moving slowly and carefully. I didn't move, didn't turn on my light, didn't make a sound. Eventually, the noise stopped. After about an hour of silence, I unzipped the tent just slightly and looked out. Everything was still and dark. When the sun came up, I stepped outside and did a quick sweep of the area. Nothing at first. Then, around 20 yards from the tent, I found a recently used match in the dirt, not weathered or damp. Nearby were 2 small indentations in the ground, like heel marks. No other footprints. I packed up immediately. Didn't eat. Just shoved everything into my pack and started back down the trail. When I passed the first camera again, I stopped. It had been moved. The lens was no longer aimed at the clearing but pointed directly at the trail, right where I was standing. That confirmed it. Someone had been there. Someone had moved the camera during the night, which meant they were close, very close. I hiked out quickly, barely stopping for water. Back at the trailhead, my car was still the only one there. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. I drove straight home. A few days later, out of curiosity, I looked online for any info on trail cams in that area. Forums, hunter sites, anything. Nothing. No listed hunting leases. No wildlife studies. And that strange Bluetooth notification from earlier. I looked into that too. Some trail cams can connect to phones or tablets. Some can even live stream. Someone had been watching, recording, and I still don't know why. It was my second night on a solo trip in the Bitterroots. Nothing extreme, just something I do now and then to get out of the house. I'm not a survivalist or anything, but I like the quiet. At least, I used to. I'd picked a spot a little off the trail, hiked in about 4 miles, then another half-mile through brush to reach a small clearing I'd marked on a topo map. Great view of the ridge, good wind cover, a small stream downhill. No signs of other campers, no trash, no fire rings. That's what I liked about it. I got set up by mid-afternoon. First thing, I threw up a bear bag. Used a dry sack and a pulley system. Tied it up between two trees, about 20 feet high. I put all my food in there, plus anything scented. Toothpaste, soap, that sort of thing. Built a small fire. Made ramen. Watched the sun dip behind the ridge. That night was quiet. Totally still. Not a sound. I usually find that calming. Next morning I went to grab my food bag. From a distance, it looked fine. Rope still tight, bag still hanging. But when I lowered it and opened it, something felt off. The drawstring was tied, but not the way I'd done it. Inside, everything looked untouched. Trail mix, jerky, coffee, all there. But the side pouch, where I kept my small camping knife, was empty. Just gone. Nothing else had been taken. Not even the energy bars. No tears or bite marks. I checked around the base of the trees, thinking maybe it fell out when I pulled the bag up. No sign of it. No tracks. No fur. No scat. I started wondering if I misplaced it. Maybe left it by the fire or near the tent. I checked everything. Nothing. And that's when things started to feel wrong. It wasn't just that the knife was gone. It was how carefully everything else had been left untouched. Whoever took it didn't disturb anything else. They didn't dump the bag. Didn't take food, just the knife. And the knot. It had definitely been retied. I kept trying to rationalize it. Told myself I dropped it earlier and hadn't noticed. But I started paying more attention to my surroundings, listening closer. Still, the woods were unusually quiet. No birds, no squirrels, just silence. Midday, I went for a loop hike to clear my head. Followed the stream for a while, snapped some photos. About a mile out, I noticed boot prints near the bank. Not mine. Mine have a broken tread on the heel. These didn't. They were fresh, deeper, like the person was carrying weight. They followed the stream north, roughly where I'd come from the day before. I tracked them a few hundred yards, then they veered off into the brush. I turned around and went straight back to camp. I didn't like the idea of someone else being out there, unnoticed. Sure, it's public land, but when you're that far out, it feels personal. There had been no smoke, no fire, no movement at night. Whoever it was, they'd been close, and I had no idea. That evening, I didn't cook, just ate a protein bar cold and sat by the fire pit, listening. At one point, I heard a stick snap, uphill somewhere. I waited. Nothing followed. When I got into the tent, I left the rain fly open and the zipper halfway down, just in case I needed to look out. I barely slept. Around 3 a.m., I heard something. Soft, a shuffle. Not right outside, but not far. Maybe 30 feet. Then again, like someone trying to move quietly but still stepping on leaves. The pattern was off. 1 or 2 steps, then silence. I didn't move, just listened. Eventually, it stopped, or they stopped moving. At first light, I got up and looked around. Nothing. No gear. No footprints I could find. But over where I'd thought the noise came from, I found something. My knife, blade down, pressed perfectly into a log. clean, no dew, no dirt, like it hadn't been there all night. I didn't touch it. I packed fast, 10 minutes flat, took down the bear line, didn't even roll up the tent properly. I kept checking the trees, expecting someone to step out. No one did. As I passed that log again, the knife was gone. I hadn't heard anyone take it, didn't see a thing. I didn't stop once the whole hike out, 4.5 miles nonstop. Only drank water once I got to my car. I don't know who it was or what they wanted, but they had the chance to take anything. My wallet, food, even my whole pack. They didn't. They took the knife, waited, then gave it back, and I don't think it was meant to be kind. I'd gone up to Lake Danby for a solo weekend, about a 3-hour drive from home. Not totally remote, but far enough to feel isolated. No cell service past the ranger station. I'd been there once, before, with a friend, and remembered a little peninsula that juts out into the lake. Secluded, but not deep in the woods. Great view. Fire ring already there. A solid spot. I parked in the main lot and hiked the 3 miles in. Got there just before sunset on Friday. No other cars in the lot. I set up camp, filtered water, had a simple dinner, trail mix, jerky. I was in the tent by 9, uneventful. Saturday morning, I got up early and circled the lake with my camera. Saw a couple of loons, got some decent shots. I got back to camp around 11 a.m., and that's when I saw him. Across the lake, maybe a few hundred yards away, standing right at the tree line, where the woods meet the water. No beach there, just trees. He was facing my direction, standing still. I couldn't see much detail, but he had on a hooded jacket and dark pants. Not moving. At first, I figured he was just another camper, maybe checking out the view. I went back to my coffee, sat near the fire ring, and started looking at my map to plan a hike. 20 minutes later, I glanced up. He was still there. Same spot. Same posture. It felt off. Not scary, just strange. I watched him for a while. He wasn't doing anything. No fishing pole, no camera. Just standing. I tried waving, even raised a hand like, "Hey," then shrugged like, "What's up?" No response. Eventually, I grabbed my gear and went for a longer hike, up a side trail that loops around the ridge above the lake. I didn't see anyone else, no other hikers, no tents. When I got back around 4, he was gone. There wasn't much daylight left, so I gathered some wood and started the small fire. I kept looking across the lake. Nothing unusual. Around dusk, I was cooking rice and tuna when I saw something move through the trees across the water. It was him. Same place. Same guy. But this time he was holding something up to his face. Took me a second to realize. He had binoculars. He wasn't just facing my direction. He was clearly watching me. I froze, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was bird watching, but there weren't any birds around. No movement at all. Just him, standing in the shadows, across the lake, focused directly on me. I turned off my stove and moved behind my tent, where I was out of sight. I stayed hidden for nearly an hour. When I peeked out again, he was still there, still watching. I kept thinking, maybe he's just odd. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe he's looking at something else. But the binoculars never moved. Neither did he. Only once it was completely dark did he finally turn and walk into the trees. No light, no sound, just gone. I barely slept that night. I kept expecting to hear someone circle in my tent. I stayed fully dressed with my headlamp and knife at arm's reach. I didn't even get in my sleeping bag, just laid on top of it, waiting. Every small sound made me tense, but nothing happened. At first light, I packed everything quickly, skipped breakfast, stuffed my gear into my pack, and headed out. I didn't want to take the trail past his side of the lake, so I followed the longer route around. It added a mile or two, but I didn't care. Halfway out, I stopped at a small overlook where you can see the lake through the trees. And there he was, again, same spot, standing at the edge of the water with binoculars raised. Even from almost a mile away and hidden by trees, he was pointed straight at me. I don't know if he'd followed me or if he never left, but there he was, watching. I got up and kept walking. I didn't stop again until I was back at the trailhead. Still no other cars, still no signal. I drove the entire way home without stopping. I didn't see a single other person that whole weekend. Just him, always watching, never speaking. I'd been looking forward to this solo camping trip for weeks. Just me, the outdoors, and some much-needed quiet. I'd found a secluded campground just off a quiet highway, remote but still accessible. The drive was long, but I didn't mind. I enjoy that sense of escape, especially when I don't have to share it with anyone. I arrived around 4 p.m. on a Friday. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows through the trees. Only a few other tents were set up, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. I picked a spot near the edge of the grounds, right next to a creek, and got everything set up. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, but I chalked that up to it being the off-season. After I got my tent and fire going, I started prepping dinner. That's when I heard voices, 2 men and a woman walking toward me, carrying a few beers and a backpack. They seemed friendly. The woman, Sarah, waved and asked, "Camping alone?" "Yeah, just a solo trip," I said, smiling. "We're just getting started. Looks like we're the only ones here," said one of the guys, tall, dark hair. "Come, join us for a drink. We've got food too." I wasn't in the mood to socialize, but they seemed harmless. I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed. They started another fire next to theirs, and we sat around chatting. Sarah asked where I was from and what brought me out here. Ben cracked jokes. Mark mostly listened. It started off easy, swapping camping stories and laughing. But the mood slowly shifted. It started with subtle comments about being alone in the woods. Then the questions got personal. "So, no girlfriend or anything?" Ben asked, leaning back casually. "Nope, just me and the trees," I replied, trying to keep it light. "You ever think about how alone you really are out here?" Mark asked, slow and deliberate. I laughed it off, said I liked camping solo. But the way they looked at me started to bother me. They weren't joking anymore. They were studying me, watching how I reacted. Sometimes they'd glance at each other, like they were silently passing messages. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about them felt wrong. I wanted to leave, but didn't want to seem rude. Eventually, as the fire started to die down, I stood up and said I was calling it a night. "You sure you don't want to stay?" Ben asked. "We're going to hang out a bit longer." "Nah, I've got an early start tomorrow," I said, keeping it casual. As I walked back to my tent, the air felt colder. I heard them laughing behind me, but the tone had changed. It didn't sound like the earlier laughs. It sounded like they were laughing at me. Back at my tent, I reached for my keys in the pouch where I always kept them. They weren't there. My stomach sank. I searched every pocket. Nothing. I tried to stay calm. Maybe I left them in the car. I walked over to check and stopped cold. Both of my driver's side tires were slashed. Not flat. Destroyed. Panic hit me. The only people nearby were those three. They had to be behind this. But why? I tried to think clearly. I couldn't drive. I had no keys, no phone signal. I grabbed my flashlight, stuffed it in my jacket, and started walking. Quiet, fast, but not running. I didn't want to draw attention. Every sound, the crunch of leaves, a branch snapping, sent my heart racing. I walked for what felt like forever before I reached a small gas station about 5 miles down the road. I was shaking when I called the police. I told them everything, but there wasn't much they could do. No proof, just my word. I waited for a tow truck, and when it came, I left. I never went back. I don't know what they wanted, but I'm sure it wouldn't have ended well if I'd stayed. I don't camp alone anymore. I just can't. I'd been hiking for hours that day, heading to a remote campsite I found online. The whole point was to get away from people. So when I pulled into the small trailhead lot and saw no one else, I was relieved. It was a Tuesday. Most people would be at work. I wanted solitude, and that's what I got. I grabbed my pack, locked the car, and started hiking. The trail was narrow, and the woods were still. Too still. No birds, no wind, no rustling. Just silence. At first, I liked it, but the deeper I went, the more unsettling it became. After about an hour, I reached the site, a simple clearing with a fire ring. I set up camp, cooked dinner, and watched the sunset behind the trees. It felt peaceful, like time had slowed down. Later that night, I got into my tent and zipped it up. The stillness outside was heavy, but I felt safe. I don't know how long I had been lying there when I heard it, breathing. At first, I thought it was my own, maybe from the hike. But this was different, steady, rhythmic. It wasn't coming from inside the tent, but from just outside. I froze, listening. It was quiet, but unmistakable, like someone had been running and was catching their breath. I felt my heart beat in my ears. I've heard stories of hikers being followed, but I'd always brushed those off. Still, there was something about that breathing that chilled me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just listened. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "Hey, is someone out there?" The breathing stopped instantly. No reply, no movement, just silence. I held my breath, waiting, but nothing else happened. I waited in silence for what felt like forever before speaking up again. "Hello?" My voice was unsteady. Still nothing. I should have felt reassured, but instead, I felt more uneasy, like I wasn't alone. The air seemed heavier, and the shadows outside my tent looked deeper somehow. I lay on my back, staring up at the tent ceiling, trying to focus. Every little sound was sharper now. The wind brushing through the trees, the crinkle of my sleeping bag, even my own breath. But aside from that, silence. No footsteps, no breathing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was just overtired from the day's hike. Eventually, I fell asleep, but it wasn't restful. I kept waking up, and every time I did, that same uneasy feeling lingered. It was like the tension never left. By morning, I felt groggy, like I hadn't really slept at all. I stepped out of the tent into the brisk morning air. Everything looked normal. No signs that anyone had been nearby. No tracks around my tent or near the fire pit. Still, something felt off. I made some coffee and sat by the fire trying to clear my head. I told myself it was just paranoia, but then I noticed something strange. The fire ring was a mess. Ash was scattered around and a branch lay broken nearby. I didn't remember it being like that. It didn't make sense. An animal, maybe. But no, animals don't usually disturb a campfire like that. This looked like someone had been there and left in a hurry. I started packing up. That feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. Every rustle in the bushes, every shift in the wind made me jump. I worked quickly, glancing over my shoulder the entire time. The walk back to the car felt endless. I kept hearing twigs snap behind me, footsteps that weren't mine. But every time I turned around, no one was there. I didn't look back again until I reached the parking lot. When I got there, my car was just as I had left it. Almost. I noticed a small scratch on the door handle, fresh and clearly not there before. I didn't waste time trying to figure it out. I tossed everything into the back, slammed the door shut, and drove off. I didn't return to the woods after that, not for a long time. I still don't know if someone was messing with me or if my imagination got the better of me. But I'm certain about one thing. Someone was out there, watching, and I wasn't going to wait around to find out who. I've done plenty of solo camping trips before. There's a unique kind of peace in being alone in nature, even if it can feel a little isolating. This trip started out like the rest. I picked a quiet area near a river in the mountains, far away from other campers. I set up for a couple of nights. The first day went well. I spent it exploring, gathering wood, and soaking in the silence. No one else was around, which was exactly what I wanted. That night I sat by the fire, toasted a few marshmallows, then turned in. On the second day, though, something felt different. The weather was still good, sunny and clear, but the quiet had changed. It was as if everything had been muted, like I was hearing through a filter. I brushed it off. Being alone in the woods can do that. I went about my day as usual. The forest was dense, so collecting firewood was easy. I didn't stray far, maybe a quarter-mile from camp. I'd been in that area before and always felt safe. But this time, I felt uneasy, not because of a noise or anything specific. It was just a sense that something was off. As I bent to grab a branch, I saw something odd in the dirt. It looked like the ground had been disturbed. I brushed away some leaves and found a shallow pit, maybe a foot deep. It was irregular, not dug for a campfire or anything practical. It looked rushed, like someone was trying to bury or hide something. I felt a chill, but I tried to dismiss it. Animals dig up dirt all the time. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I stood and scanned the area. Everything looked normal. No movement, no other tents or signs of people. But just as I was about to leave, something caught my eye. A tarp. It looked like a discarded piece of old gear. But when I walked closer, I saw dark stains on it, deep red, too fresh to have been there long. My stomach dropped. Something wasn't right. My instincts told me to leave, but I froze, staring. I slowly leaned in for a better look. That's when I heard movement, a faint rustling in the trees. Someone walking, maybe. I went completely still, trying to listen. The sound stopped. I didn't hear footsteps, but I felt something, like someone had stopped too, watching me. The feeling was overwhelming. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the pit and tarp. My thoughts raced. Had someone else camped here recently? Were they still nearby? I kept thinking about that hastily dug hole, the stained tarp, and that eerie silence. I walked back to my camp quickly, trying to stay calm. When I arrived, everything looked undisturbed. My gear, my tent, my supplies. But it didn't feel right. The air was too still, the forest too quiet. The rest of the day passed slowly. I kept looking over my shoulder, watching the tree line. As night fell, I lit the fire. The light helped a little, but I couldn't fully relax. I kept expecting something to move just out of view. By evening, I couldn't ignore the pull to go back and check. I don't know why. I just couldn't let it go. I grabbed my flashlight and knife. I didn't plan on needing them, but I wasn't taking chances. When I got there, the pit was still there, but the tarp was gone. I stared at the spot where it had been. No drag marks, no footprints, no sign that it had ever been there. The ground looked untouched. My heart pounded. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard it again. A rustling in the trees. This time I was sure. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was there. I heard the soft crunch of a branch, the quiet shuffle of feet. I didn't look back. I just ran, straight to my tent, zipped it up, and stayed inside the rest of the night. I packed at first light. No coffee, no breakfast. I just wanted to leave. As I made my way to the car, I looked around one last time, half expecting to see someone. But there was nothing. Still, I knew I was being watched. I didn't wait to confirm it. I left the mountains that day without looking back. I don't know who dug that pit or what the tarp was for, but I know I wasn't supposed to find it, and I wasn't staying to figure it out. A few months ago, I went camping alone at a remote lakeside spot I'd visited before. It had been a while, but I remembered it as the perfect escape. No service, no people, just nature and quiet. The first day was peaceful. I set up camp by the water, unpacked, and hiked around. I didn't see anyone all day. It was the kind of solitude I'd been craving. The site was isolated, but not dangerously so. Far enough to be private, close enough not to feel cut off. That night I built a fire and sat by it for hours, listening to the sounds of the night. As far as I could tell, I was alone. It was calming. Around midnight, I started to doze off until I heard something. A laugh, faint and distant. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then I heard it again. Closer this time. Not loud, more like a quiet chuckle, and it was nearby. I assumed it was just another camper, maybe talking with friends around their own fire. Not unusual in places like that. But I still felt uneasy. Something about it didn't feel right. I tried to brush it off. There were probably others nearby, and I wasn't deep in the wilderness. It was late, but I figured someone was just staying up enjoying the evening. But then I heard it again. A laugh. Louder this time, and definitely closer. It didn't sound cheerful or relaxed. It had a strained, uneasy tone, like someone trying to stay quiet and failing. Something about it didn't feel right. It wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from good company. It had a sneaky, unsettling quality. I turned over in my sleeping bag, hoping it would stop. Maybe it was just the wind playing tricks. I tried to ignore it, but the laughter kept coming. It wasn't constant, just every few minutes, close enough that I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. I laid there for a while, listening, trying to reason with myself that it was nothing. Maybe just another camper too close. But it didn't feel right. The laugh was too strange, too uneven, almost like the person was trying to hide but couldn't keep quiet. I could also hear soft movements in the leaves, like someone shifting or getting closer. The longer it went on, the more uneasy I became. I couldn't tell if it was the sound itself or the thought that whoever it was deliberately staying hidden. Either way, I had a bad feeling. I grabbed my flashlight, deciding to at least peek outside my tent. I didn't plan on approaching anyone, just looking. I unzipped the tent door slowly and scanned the dark. The beam from my flashlight lit up the trees, but I didn't see anything. No movement. The forest was still. Even the laughter had stopped. It was too quiet. I stayed awake after that, unable to relax. I kept listening, waiting, but the laugh didn't return. Still, the feeling that someone was nearby watching lingered. I lay there alert, noticing every small sound. The crack of twigs, the shift of leaves, each one made my heart race. By morning, I was more than ready to get out of the tent. The sun was up, birds were chirping, and everything looked calm. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling from the night before. I decided to check out the area where I thought the sound had come from. I packed a small day bag with water and snacks and started walking through the woods, hoping to find some evidence, maybe a fire pit or signs of someone camping. I walked for about half an hour, heading in the direction where I believed the sound had come from. The woods were calm, and the quiet wasn't unnerving like the night before. It felt normal now. When I got to the area I thought the noise had come from, I found nothing. No fire pit, no tent, no litter, not even a footprint. I searched carefully, puzzled. I had been so sure the sound came from nearby, but now it was like no one had been there at all. I wandered the area, scanning the trees and ground for any sign, but found nothing. The forest was undisturbed, completely still. I stood there, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the sound had traveled on the wind from farther away, but that didn't feel right either. It had seemed too close, too clear. The laugh was real. I'm sure of that. I returned to camp a little on edge, but not ready to leave. I hadn't found anything dangerous, just nothing. But the whole situation stayed with me. The laughter, the strange feeling. It all felt off. I spent the rest of the day watching the area, but nothing else happened. The following night was uneventful. The wind was calm, the trees still, no laughter. The next morning I packed up and left. I haven't been back to that spot since. Something about the place just doesn't sit right anymore. That laugh, the sensation of being watched, then finding absolutely nothing. It was too strange. I don't know who was out there or why, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I hadn't planned on camping solo, but life had been overwhelming, and I needed a break. Somewhere quiet, not far from the city. just a couple hours up into the mountains. My goal was simple: find a peaceful lake, set up camp, and forget about everything for a weekend. The first day was perfect. I found a great spot right at the edge of a small, calm lake. The weather was just right, not too hot or too cold. I spent the day walking the area, exploring, and enjoying the solitude. I didn't see another person the entire time, just me and the forest. As the sun set, I got a fire going and cooked a simple dinner. Everything felt peaceful, maybe too peaceful. I was tired but didn't want to go to bed just yet, so I sat by the fire, watching the flames and listening to the sounds of the night, the usual forest noise, leaves rustling, distant animals. It was getting late when I first heard the steps. At first, I thought it was the wind or a small animal, but then I realized these were footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. They were getting closer. I froze. I hadn't seen anyone all day, and this wasn't a popular campsite. Then, out of nowhere, a man appeared from the trees. He looked disoriented and unsure of where he was. Mid-30s, tall, wearing old, torn clothes. His hair was messy, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't look like a hiker. "Hey," he said, voice shaky. "I'm lost. I don't know how I got here. Can I sit for a minute?" Before I could say anything, he sat down by the fire, closer than I would have liked. He kept scanning the area like he was checking for someone. His breathing was fast, and he looked tense. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "How'd you end up out here?" He didn't respond right away, just kept glancing over his shoulder, hands shaking. He wiped them repeatedly on his pants. "Someone's following me," he whispered suddenly. "I don't know who, but I can feel it. They're watching." He looked at me like I should have understood what he meant, but I didn't. "Okay," I said, unsure what to do. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" "I don't know," he muttered. "I just need to stay here for a while." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted him to leave, but he seemed genuinely scared. The way he kept looking around made me think there was more going on. Maybe he was just lost, or maybe he'd been out here too long and it was affecting him. I gave him some water, tried to help him calm down, but he wouldn't settle. He kept insisting that someone was nearby, watching. "Look, I'm not sure how much I can help," I said, starting to get uneasy. "You should probably go to the ranger station nearby. They can—" "No," he cut in too quickly. "I can't go back. They'll find me." He looked down, then back up at me with wide eyes. "Please, I need to stay. I can't leave." His desperation was unnerving. I started to wonder if he was under the influence of something or just mentally frayed. Still, I noticed he wasn't asking to stay by the fire or for a place to sleep. He was staring at my tent. "Listen," I said, trying to stay composed. "If you're really lost, I'll help, but you can't stay here all night. It's not safe." He nodded like he understood, but didn't move. Just sat there, hands clenched, eyes scanning everything. I didn't know what to do. I felt stuck, unable to tell him to leave, but too uncomfortable to let him stay. Then, out of nowhere, he stood up. I need to go in your tent," he said, voice trembling. "Please." I didn't know how to respond. The request was so out of place. He seemed panicked, and I wasn't sure what he'd do if I said no. "No," I said firmly, trying to stay calm. "You can't go in my tent." He stared at me, then began walking toward it anyway. He wasn't asking anymore. He was set on it. I jumped up and blocked his path. "No, you need to leave," I said more forcefully. "This is my space." But he didn't listen. He reached for the zipper. That's when I lost patience. I pushed him back, harder than I meant to. "Leave," I said sharply. He stumbled back, eyes wide in surprise and fear. For a moment I thought he might react violently. But then he just stood there, breathing heavily. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I thought they'd..." Before I could respond, he turned and ran into the woods. Gone so fast I barely had time to process it. I stood there, stunned, wondering what had just happened. I kept waiting for him to come back, but he never did. The fire crackled and the night air grew colder, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching me. By morning, packed up quickly and left. I never saw him again, and to be honest, I didn't want to. That encounter had left me uneasy, and I didn't want to stick around to find out what might happen next. One afternoon, I decided to go for a walk. It was just a regular day, the kind when you don't expect anything unusual to happen. I'd been trying to get into the habit of walking more, to clear my head. So, I took the long route through an old park near the edge of town. It wasn't a park that saw much traffic, mostly because it was run down and overgrown. But that's part of why I liked it. There was a certain quiet solitude there, a kind you don't find in the busier parts of town. As I walked along the dirt path, something caught my eye, a wallet, half buried in the dirt just off to the side. At first, I thought it was just trash, as people often left things behind, especially around this park. But when I bent down to pick it up, I noticed the leather was still in good condition, not something that had been lying there for years. Inside, I found a driver's license belonging to a guy named Rick Stanton from out of state. The wallet was thin, containing just a couple of cards and some cash, but no photos or anything personal, which struck me as odd. I figured someone probably dropped it, and that I might be able to find the owner by contacting the place on the ID. But something about it felt off. I didn't want to leave it there, though, so I slipped it in my pocket, planning to look up the number later. As I continued my walk, I couldn't stop thinking about how the wallet had ended up there. The park wasn't a common spot for tourists or people passing through. It was the kind of place you'd only know about if you were local, or if you were somewhere you shouldn't have been. My thoughts started to wander, and I didn't notice a small indentation in the ground ahead of me until I almost stepped on it. I stopped and looked down. The dirt had been disturbed, as though someone had scraped away a patch and tried to cover it back up. Curiosity got the better of me, so I knelt down to inspect it. The hole wasn't deep, but it was definitely there. As I poked at the dirt, something hard caught my fingers. I pulled it out carefully. Another wallet. This one was old and worn, as though it had been buried for a while. I couldn't believe it. This was a random spot in the park, nowhere near any popular areas. I tried not to let it weird me out, but I felt a little uneasy. Inside, there was the same thing. An ID, a couple of cards, a little cash. But this ID was from a different state, not far, but still not local. I wasn't sure what to make of it. It felt too strange, too much of a coincidence. I glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the trees or bushes, but there was nothing, just the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves and birds in the distance. I set the wallet aside and stood up, looking around. That's when I noticed something else, a slight depression in the ground near a tree. It was the kind of thing you might miss if you weren't paying attention. Without thinking, I walked over and started digging. The dirt was soft and sandy, easy to move through. It didn't take long before I found something else. A phone. It wasn't brand new, but it was still relatively modern. It was scratched up, definitely used, but didn't look like it had been there for too long. At this point, I was starting to feel really uneasy, holding the phone in my hand. I noticed the wallpaper, a picture of a woman and child smiling. There were a few notifications, but nothing urgent. The back of the phone was scratched like it had been dropped several times. I wasn't sure what I was doing, whether I should check it for something useful or leave it alone, but I couldn't stop staring at it. That's when I noticed something else, a shallow hole, maybe 3 or 4 feet away. I walked over, scraped away more dirt, and found another wallet, then another, and another. Each one was different, old and worn, and none of them belonged in the park. I don't know how many I found, maybe 5 or 6, but they all had one thing in common. They were from different states, and none of them looked like they had been there for long. The more I dug, the more I realized what I was looking at. A collection. Someone had buried these things here on purpose, not just lost items that had been forgotten, but things carefully hidden. The thought of it made my stomach turn. My heart started racing as I realized what I might have stumbled upon. Something didn't feel right. I stopped digging. I didn't know who had done this or why, but I didn't want to find out. The idea that someone might have been watching me, or worse, that they were still nearby, made my skin crawl. I tried to stay calm, but the more I thought about it, the worse it felt. I stood up quickly, looking around. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, just out of sight, waiting. I took one last glance at the hole where I'd found all the wallets, then started walking fast. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, trying to tell myself I was overthinking things. But I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. Had I stumbled onto something weird, or something worse? I didn't stop until I was back on the main road, far from the park. Only then did I let myself take a breath. I didn't know what to do with the wallets I'd found or why they were there. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going back to that park, and if I never saw those things again, it would be too soon. It was supposed to be a normal weekend hike. My buddy Eric and I had been talking about hitting some trails for a while, so we finally picked a spot about an hour outside of town. It wasn't a busy trail. Mostly locals went there, and it wasn't on any major maps, which was part of the appeal. It was quiet and secluded, just how we liked it. The first couple of miles went fine. We caught up on life. I focused on the hike, the feel of the dirt trail under my boots, the sounds of birds and wind through the trees. The place was beautiful. Thick forest, tall trees, some streams, a kind of nature that made you feel small in the best way possible. We stopped for a break by a stream. I sat on a rock, took a sip of water, and just listened to the flowing water and the birds overhead. Eric had his phone out, probably checking the map or texting someone. He didn't notice at first, but I did. A rustling noise, not from the wind or leaves, but something heavier, like someone or something pushing through the brush. I looked around but didn't see anything. I thought it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But then I heard it again. This time I saw movement in the trees, something black darting between the trunks. I pointed it out to Eric. He squinted in the direction I was looking, but whatever it was gone by then. Probably just someone else on the trail, he said, taking a sip of his water bottle. Yeah, maybe, I replied, but I wasn't convinced. The movement had been too fast, too deliberate, and it felt off. It didn't feel like a hiker just passing by. We didn't say much after that. We kept walking, but the uneasy feeling lingered. The further we went, the more it felt like we weren't alone. I kept hearing rustling in the bushes, glimpsing something dark moving in the trees. But whenever I tried to get a better look, it was always gone. I tried to shake it off. After all, we'd been hiking for hours, and my mind was probably just playing tricks on me. But then we heard it. Footsteps, soft at first, but getting closer, slow and deliberate, like someone was trying to stay hidden. Eric and I stopped, and the footsteps stopped too. The forest fell silent, except for the wind. We stood there, staring at each other. My heart was racing, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't want to turn around, but I felt like I had to. That's not an animal, I whispered. Eric didn't reply. He just gave me a nervous look. I could tell he felt it too. Then we heard something different. A faint snapping sound, like a twig breaking. It was coming from behind us, and it was getting louder, closer. I wanted to turn around, but I couldn't. I knew it wasn't good. Dude, I think we should get out of here, Eric said, his voice low. Let's just head back to the car. I nodded, and we started walking faster, but the footsteps didn't stop. They followed us, slow, deliberate, but never quite catching up. I kept checking over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. Just trees, just shadows. We were maybe 15 minutes from the trailhead when I heard it, a heavy dragging sound through the underbrush. I froze. My stomach dropped. I glanced at Eric and his face was pale. Go, I hissed. We both broke into a run and the dragging sound stopped. But the footsteps started again, faster this time, as if someone was chasing us. I didn't look back. My heart was pounding and my legs were burning, but I didn't care. I just wanted to make it to the car and get out of there. Then I saw it, a figure darting between two trees ahead of us, dressed all in black. I only caught a glimpse, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Whoever, or whatever it wasn't just running through the woods. We were walking down the trail when I noticed the man ahead. He was moving with a purpose, almost as if he knew exactly where we were headed. I felt a sudden wave of panic. This wasn't just a random hiker. This was someone following us, maybe even hunting us. I heard Eric shout something, but it was too faint to make out. I couldn't take my eyes off the figure, now standing right in front of us. He was holding something, a machete, though I didn't want to get close enough to confirm. He stood still, just watching us. Eric stopped beside me, out of breath. We were trapped. We didn't speak, just stared at the man in black. He didn't move, but he didn't back off either. The machete glinted in the weak light filtering through the trees. His breathing was steady, calm, almost like he wasn't concerned at all. "Who the hell are you?" Eric managed to choke out. The man didn't respond, just remained standing. Everything was silent for a moment, and I could hear the pounding of my heart in my ears. My hands were shaking, but I knew we couldn't stay there. I didn't care about the weapon. We couldn't just stand around and wait for whatever he was planning. Without saying a word, I grabbed Eric's arm and started running, dragging him along. We pushed through the trees, not looking back, not stopping. We ran for what felt like forever, but eventually we reached the end of the trail, the parking lot. I didn't wait for Eric. I ran straight to my car, yanked open the door, and jumped inside. Eric was right behind me, slamming the door shut. Without thinking, I started the engine and sped off. We didn't speak as I drove, not until we were miles away. By then, the adrenaline had worn off, and we both sat in silence, trying to catch our breath. I didn't know who that man was or what he wanted, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going hiking there again. I was sitting at the edge of the trail, trying to catch my breath. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the path. Everything was quiet except for the rustling leaves. My friend Jake had gone off to use the bathroom about 20 minutes ago, and I was starting to feel impatient. Not that I'd admit it. I'm usually the one who takes my time. But we'd been hiking for a while, and I was ready to head back. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts from Jake. That was strange. I figured maybe he was just taking longer than usual, but something about the silence felt off. I called him, but he didn't pick up. I shrugged it off for the moment and went back to watching the trail. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Jake. It was short, just a few words. "Don't look for me." I froze. My stomach sank. I stared at the screen, convinced I had to be misreading it. I double-checked the name. It was definitely from Jake's number. I wasn't sure how to respond. Was he joking? It didn't sound like him, not at all. I called him again. This time it rang a few times before going to voicemail. The silence that followed felt heavy. I checked the time. 20 minutes had passed since he'd left. Something felt wrong, but I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe he just wanted some space or was messing with me. He was known for his pranks, but this felt different. I stood up and walked toward the area where he'd left to use the bathroom. The path twisted around rocks and disappeared into the trees. It was getting darker now, and I couldn't see far ahead. I was about to call him again when my phone buzzed once more. Same text. "Don't look for me." That was it. I wasn't staying put anymore. I didn't care if he was pulling a prank. Something didn't feel right. I turned around and started walking down the trail, scanning for any sign of him. The trail wasn't long, but it had a lot of twists and turns. I walked for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. No sign of Jake. I called again, straight to voicemail. Something was definitely off. My gut told me to stop, but my mind urged me forward. I had to make sure he was okay. I wasn't going to ignore that text. After a few more steps, I saw it. A snapped branch and fresh footprints leading off the main path and into the underbrush. They were big, Jake's size or close. The footprints were all over the place, like someone had been moving quickly, maybe stumbling. My heart raced. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to keep going. I followed the trail, keeping my distance. I had to know what happened to Jake. I walked for a bit longer, scanning the area. Then, through the trees, I saw a dark shape on the ground. It was Jake's backpack, half hidden under branches. I couldn't see him, just the pack. I froze for a moment, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. It felt wrong to approach, but I couldn't just leave it there. I moved closer and knelt down. I saw his water bottle, his jacket, and a granola bar. Everything was untouched, like he'd just dropped the pack and walked away. That's when I heard it. A faint rustling sound, like something moving quickly through the brush. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but something held me in place. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. Then, my phone buzzed again. Same message. Don't look for me. This time, it felt like a warning, like whatever was out there knew exactly what I was doing. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing there, but there was nothing. I needed to leave. I had to get back to the trailhead. I started walking back, but then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. They weren't mine. They weren't Jake's. Someone else was walking behind me, staying just out of sight, rustling the leaves underfoot, like they were trying to be quiet. I broke into a jog, trying to get back to the main trail. I needed to get out of there. Their footsteps kept pace, staying just behind me. I wasn't looking back. I couldn't. Every part of me wanted to run, but I knew that would only make things worse. Finally, I broke through the trees and saw the open trail. The parking lot was in sight. I felt a breath of relief, but I didn't stop. I kept walking fast, eyes darting back and forth, waiting for someone to jump out. When I reached my car, I didn't even look at my phone. I just got in, started the engine, and left. I never went back to check on Jake. Something told me that if I did, I'd find something I wasn't prepared for, and I never heard from him again. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, just me and my brother camping in a secluded part of the park. We'd been here before, but this time, something felt different. The quiet surrounded us like a thick fog. The weather was perfect, not too hot or cold, just cool enough for a hoodie at night. We set up camp in our usual spot, not too far from the trailhead, but far enough to feel isolated. We spent the afternoon hiking, taking in the views from the lookout point, and then started a fire to cook dinner. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. It was one of those moments when you didn't want to move, when everything just slowed down. I was finishing some trail mix when I heard footsteps. At first I thought it was my brother, maybe checking the campsite or gathering more firewood. But then I looked up. There was a man standing at the edge of our camp. He wasn't in hiking gear, just a khaki shirt, cargo pants, and a ranger hat. At first, I thought he might be a park ranger doing a routine check. But then I realized something was off. He had appeared without a word, without any introduction. "Evening," he said, looking at us without a smile. His voice was calm, but there was something unsettling about it. "You need to pack up. Leave immediately." I glanced at my brother, who looked just as confused as I felt. "What do you mean? Is something wrong?" I asked, trying to understand. "I'm here to get you out," he said, his gaze shifting toward the trees behind our tent. He lingered there a second too long, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked back at my brother. "We're not in danger, are we?" I asked, trying to sound casual. But the way the man was talking didn't feel like the usual warnings we'd heard before. His tone was urgent, but also distant, like he didn't really care what happened to us. The man stepped forward slightly. "Listen," he said, his tone sharpening. You need to leave now. I'm not asking. It's not safe here. I felt it then, the prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Something wasn't right. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about the situation felt off. I stood up slowly, trying to stay calm. Okay, but I just want to confirm this with the station, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Inside, though, there was a tightness in my chest that I couldn't ignore. The ranger didn't move, but his eyes darted between the trees and the ground, clearly uneasy. That's not necessary, he said, his voice still calm, but firm. Just back up. I held my ground. I'm calling the station. I'll back up after I confirm this with them. He didn't respond right away, just stood there, watching me closely, like he was waiting for me to change my mind. I stepped a few feet away for some privacy and dialed the park station. It was a direct line to the ranger's office, and I expected to hear the usual voice. But this time, a man's voice answered. Hello, this is Ranger Daniels. How can I help you? Hi, I'm at the campsite near the trailhead, and I've got a ranger here telling me we need to leave. Something about a bear. Can you confirm that? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath from the other end. Wait, you said you're at the trailhead and a ranger told you to leave? Yeah, that's right. A guy in a khaki shirt and hat. He just showed up and told us to pack up. I could hear typing on the other end. We didn't send anyone out there, Ranger Daniels said, his voice confused. There's no report of a bear sighting, and no rangers were assigned to that area tonight. My heart skipped a beat. So, you didn't send anyone? No one's out there? No, ma'am. Are you sure it was a ranger? It could have been someone impersonating one. A chill ran down my spine. That wasn't possible. The man had been in uniform. He was wearing the uniform, I replied. Where exactly are you? I need to know which campsite you're at. I gave the coordinates and some nearby landmarks. After confirming, Ranger Daniels said, Stay where you are. Do not leave your campsite. I'll send someone to check on you. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I looked up at the man still standing by our fire. He hadn't moved. His expression was unchanged, but his stance was more rigid now, like he was waiting for something. I didn't hesitate. I turned to my brother. We're not going anywhere. Stay inside the tent and don't come out until I say it's safe. The ranger's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer. You really think it's a good idea to stick around out here? I'm not leaving, I said, my voice firmer than I meant. I'm waiting for backup. For a moment, the ranger didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me, as if trying to read me. Then he spoke in a low, gravelly voice. You don't know what you're dealing with. His tone was almost persuasive, but I wasn't buying it. The tension in the air was thick, and every part of me told me to run, but I stood my ground. Minutes later, I heard the sound of an engine approaching. The headlights came into view, and the ranger stepped back. This was it. I had confirmation that no one was supposed to be out here, but still, he didn't run. He didn't even seem worried. The Park Service vehicle pulled into the clearing, and 2 rangers jumped out. They looked at the man near our fire, not saying a word at first, just sizing him up. Finally, one of them asked, What are you doing? Here. The man in the khaki shirt didn't answer. He simply turned and walked into the woods, disappearing without a word. I never saw him again. The rangers spoke to us for a few minutes, checking if we were okay. and if we needed help packing up. They never mentioned anything about a bear or why someone had told us to leave. They told us we could stay if we wanted. After a brief and somewhat awkward silence, they left. I don't know who that man was, but I'm certain he wasn't a ranger. What stuck with me the most wasn't just the uniform. It was the way he acted. He knew exactly how to make me doubt myself, to make me question my instincts. The way he left without a word. It was as if he didn't care whether I followed him or not. And if I hadn't called the station, if I hadn't waited for backup, who knows what would have happened. Last fall, I was hiking along a remote trail in the mountains when I found a tent. It wasn't anything special, just a basic two-person tent, a little worn, but still intact. At first, I thought it was just an abandoned campsite. People often leave their stuff behind when they pack up early. But then I got closer, and I noticed the claw marks. At first, I assumed it was some random damage, maybe from a bear or some other animal. But as I examined it more closely, I realized the marks weren't random. They were sharp and deliberate, like something had slashed through the fabric. The cuts were deep, the kind you wouldn't expect from an animal, especially not a bear. The tent was shredded in a few places, the jagged lines running down almost to the ground, as though something had tried to tear it open. I crouched next to the tent and poked around the edge of the ribs. There was no blood or signs of a struggle. Inside, it was empty. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but the silence around me was unnerving. The only noise was the wind rustling through the trees. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A knife stuck in the ground right outside the tent. It wasn't old or rusty. It was modern, clean, the kind you could buy at a camping store or online. The knife was just there, stuck in the dirt with the handle facing up, like it had been tossed there in a hurry. I didn't know why, but the sight of that knife made everything feel wrong. Why would someone leave their knife behind like that? Why would it be lying there, just outside the tent, as if someone had thrown it down and walked away? I stood there, staring at the knife, trying to make sense of what was going on. Maybe it was just an abandoned site where people left in a hurry. But then I noticed the tracks around the tent, boot prints in the mud, but they were all leading away from the tent, not toward it. That's when my mind started to race. I took a step back, scanning the area. There was no one around. I pulled out my phone to check for service, but of course there was none. The spot I had wandered into was a little off the beaten path, hidden behind some thick trees and boulders. It would be a while before anyone came by. But still, something didn't feel right. Why would someone leave a tent behind, slash it up, and leave their knife like that? Maybe I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I decided to check the tent more closely, just to see if there was anything inside that might give me a clue. I carefully unzipped the tent, half expecting something to jump out at me. Inside, there was a sleeping bag and some camping gear, but it hadn't been used in a while. No signs of anyone having been there recently, at least not any obvious ones. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. The whole situation still didn't sit right with me. I couldn't stop thinking about the knife and those claw marks. It felt like a warning. I packed up my gear, ready to leave, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. As I backtracked down the trail, I kept telling myself it was nothing, just an abandoned camp. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. About halfway back to the main trail, I heard a noise behind me. At first, I thought it was just the wind or an animal moving through the brush. But But then I heard it again. Soft, crunching footsteps on the leaves, like someone was walking behind me. I stopped, my heart racing. Maybe someone had been watching me. Maybe whoever left the tent was nearby, and now they were following me. I turned around, scanning the trees, but there was nothing, just shadows in the empty path behind me. The noise stopped. Maybe it was nothing. I kept walking, but the feeling of being watched only grew. Every time a branch cracked or the wind shifted, I tensed up, expecting someone to jump out from behind a tree, but nothing ever happened. When I finally reached the main trail, I looked back toward where I'd found the tent. It was far enough now that I couldn't see it, but I couldn't shake the image of the knife and those claw marks. Something about it had felt like a warning. I made it back to the parking lot without further incident, the feeling of being watched fading the further I got from that spot. But as I drove home, I kept thinking about that knife. Who had left it there? What had happened to the people who camped there? And the most terrifying thought of all, was I just being paranoid? Or was someone still out there, watching, waiting for the next person to stumble into their camp? I'll never forget that night in the mountains. I went camping by myself for a quick weekend getaway to clear my head. It wasn't my first time, just me, my tent, and the wilderness. The plan was simple, a peaceful, relaxing escape, but something about that night felt different. I arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon, the sun already dipping behind the trees. It wasn't a popular area, more of a secluded spot where you're lucky to see anyone else, which is exactly why I liked it. I set up my tent, made a quick dinner over the campfire, and just sat there, taking it all in. It was quiet, perhaps too quiet, but that's the kind of silence I was searching for, the kind you can't find in the city. Then, as the sun fully set, I first heard the footsteps. At first, it was nothing distinct, just the sound of something moving in the brush not far from my tent. A twig snapped, leaves rustled. I figured it was an animal. Bears, deer, coyotes. They all wandered through the area occasionally, so I wasn't too concerned. I zipped up the tent, tried to get comfortable, but something felt off. It was like I was being watched. I dismissed it as nerves and settled in for the night. But the noises didn't stop. Every so often, I would hear something moving outside, close enough to unsettle me. But whenever I checked, I saw nothing, just shadows. Around midnight, I heard it more clearly. Footsteps, deliberate and slow. Boots on dirt. It circled my tent, pacing back and forth. Whoever it was wasn't walking straight. They moved in a perfect circle, stopping and starting, over and over. I held my breath, straining to listen. The wind had died down, leaving only the sound of boots crunching on the ground. At first, it was just one set of footsteps, but then it sounded like 2 or 3. I couldn't tell. All I knew was it was too close for comfort. I lay there frozen, hoping it was nothing. But the more I listened, the closer it sounded, like they were circling, trying to find a way in. The footsteps came in waves, slow and careful, then fast and erratic, as if the person wasn't sure what to do. Every so often, they'd stop, and I'd hold my breath, hoping they'd leave. But they never did. They just kept circling. At one point, I swear I heard something scrape against the outside of my tent. Was someone dragging their hand along the fabric? My heart raced. It was too late to leave. I wasn't even sure I could, with whoever or whatever was so close, but there was no way I'd be able to sleep with those noises. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, listening to the footsteps circling my tent, hoping the dawn would come. And when it finally did, with the first light of day breaking through the trees, I thought it was over. The sounds had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, my heart still pounding. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing there, waiting, but there was nothing, just the quiet of the morning woods. I almost felt relieved, almost. Then I saw the footprints, dozens of them, scattered around my tent. They weren't random. They formed a perfect circle, as if whoever had been pacing outside had been walking in a circle the entire night. The prints were deep, like the person had been wearing heavy boots. I crouched down to get a closer look, and my stomach dropped. The prints weren't all from the same person. There were different sizes, some smaller, some bigger, like multiple people had been walking around my tent. I couldn't make sense of it. My mind tried to convince me it was just a coincidence, but I knew better. This wasn't normal. I stood there, staring at the prints, trying to piece together what had happened. Who had been out there? Why had they circled my tent all night? And why hadn't I heard anything else? No talking, no movement, just the footsteps. The panic was rising in my chest. I needed to get out of there. I didn't care if I left all my stuff behind. I just needed to go. I grabbed my gear and started packing, constantly glancing around, half expecting to see someone emerge from the woods. But there was nothing, just the empty, quiet forest. When everything was packed, I didn't waste any time. I zipped up the tent and started walking quickly, taking a longer route if necessary. I just wanted to get out. The sooner I was back at my car, the better. I walked fast, not looking back. The entire walk to the trailhead felt like someone was behind me, just out of sight. Every crunch of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. But when I looked around, no one was there. When I finally reached my car, I threw my things in the back and got in. I didn't check if I had everything. I just drove. I didn't stop until I hit the first town, and even then, I kept going. I didn't look back. I don't know who or what had been outside my tent that night, but I know it wasn't a coincidence. I haven't gone camping alone since. On another trip, a while ago, I decided to go camping alone again, mostly to get away from everything and have some peace and quiet. I chose a secluded part of the woods, a place that was barely known, where a few people camped. It was exactly what I was looking for. I got there late in the day. By the time I set everything up, the sun was setting. I figured I'd get a quick fire going and maybe read before heading to bed. I was lighting the fire when I heard a voice. It wasn't close, but loud enough to make me turn around. "Hey, you out here solo?" I stood up and saw a guy walking toward me, maybe in his mid-30s, dressed in hiking gear, carrying a big pack. He seemed friendly enough, so I waved. He got closer, and I could see his face more clearly. He smiled, but there was something off about him. Maybe it was his eyes, too intense, or the way his smile didn't quite match his tone. "Yeah, just me. It's nice to be out here without a bunch of people around," I said, trying to keep things casual. "Same here," he replied, nodding. "I like it when it's quiet. You got your tent set up already?" I pointed to my tent and he looked at it for a moment before looking back at me. "I'm over that way," he said, gesturing behind him, "just past those trees. It's not much, but it works. I've got a few things to set up before dark." He mentioned setting up a few things a couple of times, but I didn't think much of it. I figured it was his camping gear. After some small talk, he asked if I wanted to join him for dinner, but I politely declined. I wasn't in the mood for company. He seemed fine, but I preferred my solitude, especially when camping. "No worries," he said with a smile. "If you change your mind, I'll be over there." He turned and headed back toward his campsite. I spent the evening cooking a simple dinner and reading for a bit. I couldn't help but glance over at his campsite once or twice. There was something about the way he kept looking around, especially toward my tent, that made me feel like I wasn't completely alone. That night I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing sounds, twigs breaking, scratching at the ground. The usual forest noises, but it felt different. I kept thinking I heard someone moving near my tent, just outside the light from my campfire. I told myself it was probably just an animal, a raccoon maybe, but then I heard it again, more clearly this time. Footsteps not far from me, just beyond the reach of my firelight. I didn't move, just held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped, and I felt a weird sensation, like I was being watched, but after a while, the sound stopped completely, and I convinced myself it was nothing. The next day, I decided to go for a hike. The guy from the night before was still around his campsite, but he seemed preoccupied, so I didn't bother him. I walked down one of the trails, trying to enjoy the quiet. It was midday when I came across something that gave me pause. Trail cameras. At first, I wasn't surprised. People set them up to track wildlife or monitor animal behavior. But these cameras weren't pointed at the forest or the trail. They were aimed directly at my tent. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart was pounding. I don't know why it bothered me so much, but it did. The positioning of the cameras felt deliberate. They were set at different angles, all focused on my tent. I quickly glanced around, but there was no one in sight. The air felt different now, like I was being watched, even though I couldn't see anyone. I continued walking past the cameras, keeping my eye on the trail behind me. When I returned to my campsite, the guy was already there. He was standing just outside my tent, fiddling with something in his hands. I couldn't see what it was, but he didn't seem to notice me approach. "Hey," I called out, louder than I meant to. He turned quickly, a little too quickly. I noticed his expression had changed, his face slightly flushed, as though he had been caught off guard. He forced a tight smile and said, "Hey, I was just checking on your tent, making sure everything's okay." His tone felt off, too casual. I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Just making sure it's secure, with the wind and all. Sometimes tents get blown over during the night," he explained, scratching the back of his neck. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes this time. I nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. It seemed like an odd thing to do, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. "Right, thanks, I guess." I quickly zipped up my tent, deciding not to engage too much. I didn't know what his deal was, but I wasn't going to stand there talking. As I sat inside, I kept thinking about the trail cameras. Why would he have set them up like that? And why hadn't he mentioned them earlier? After some thought, I knew I had to confront him. I grabbed my things, walked out of the tent, and headed toward his camp. When I arrived, I saw him sitting by his fire, lost in thought. I took a deep breath and walked up to him. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I saw some trail cameras out there, the ones pointing at my tent. What's that about?" He looked up at me, and for a brief moment I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, perhaps annoyance or panic, but it was gone too quickly for me to be sure. He smiled again, but this time it wasn't the same friendly grin. "Oh, those," he said, trying to sound casual. "I set them up to track animals. I wasn't sure where the wildlife would be, and I wanted to get some good footage. Didn't think it would be a big deal." I could tell he was lying. His voice was too smooth, too rehearsed. It didn't sit right with me, and I knew I couldn't trust him. Without saying anything else, I nodded and turned back toward my campsite. That night I packed up everything I had left, making sure my tent was securely zipped. I took one last look around. I didn't care if it was getting dark or if I had to drive through the night. I wasn't staying. I left the woods as quickly as I could, never looking back. The entire drive home, I kept wondering if I had overreacted or if something had been off about him. But deep down, I knew I wasn't wrong to leave. I never went back to that spot, and I never camped alone again. I decided to take a solo hike one weekend, hoping for a peaceful escape. Just me, the trail, and the mountains. No distractions. I had been itching to get away from everything and clear my head. I'd hiked before, but this trail was more remote than usual. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and that's exactly why I liked it. I got an early start that morning. The air was crisp, and the sun was just starting to rise, casting everything in a golden hue. I felt excited but a little nervous too. I didn't know the trail well, but I figured it would be fine. As I started walking, I enjoyed the quiet and the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt. After a couple of hours, I stopped to take a breather and grab some water. I hadn't seen anyone else all morning, just me and the occasional bird overhead. But as I rested, I noticed something odd. I could hear footsteps in the distance, not close, but definitely there. At first, I didn't think much of it. Other people hike these trails too, right? But I hadn't seen anyone all morning, which struck me as a bit strange. I figured maybe they were just behind me or coming up from another part of the trail. I kept drinking my water, but I glanced over my shoulder once. The footsteps were still there, but no one was in sight. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just someone on a different part of the trail. But then, the footsteps stopped. Not like the usual trail noises, where they fade as someone passes. These stopped completely. The air seemed to shift, and for a second, it felt like the entire forest went still. I waited, but the sound didn't resume. I started walking again, trying to shake off the strange feeling. But after a few minutes, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Someone was definitely following me. Every time I took a step, their footsteps matched mine, keeping the exact same pace, staying just far enough away that I couldn't see them. I tried stopping again, pretending to stretch, just to see if they would keep moving past me. Sure enough, after a few seconds, they stopped too, right behind me. The tension in the air was palpable. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing. Just trees, rocks, and the narrow trail behind me. No sound, no movement. I waited a few more minutes, but nothing changed. I wasn't sure if I should call out. What if it was some random person just hiking the trail? But why were they so far behind? Why weren't they passing me? The uneasy feeling in my gut only grew stronger. I decided to keep walking, but this time, I picked up the pace. If they were going to follow me, I didn't want them to get any closer. But as I increased my speed, so did the footsteps. They matched my pace exactly, staying right behind me. I reached a point where the trail split, leading to a more open area with a great view of the valley. I hoped I'd get some space if I took that route. But as I stepped onto the new path, I heard the footsteps again. They didn't stop. Whoever it was had changed direction to follow me. Panic started to rise in my chest. The more I tried to act casual, the worse it got. It felt like this person was trying to stay invisible, getting closer every time I moved. I started feeling trapped, unable to outrun them. The quiet was suffocating, the kind of silence where every small sound felt amplified. I stopped again, trying to steady my breath. I didn't want to panic, but every part of me screamed to get out of there. The footsteps stopped again, exactly as they had before. I glanced over my shoulder once more. This time, I thought I saw something. A shadow, barely noticeable between the trees. Was that them? Were they watching me? I took off again, forcing myself to keep moving. I didn't stop until I reached a point where I had to either keep going or turn back. The trail narrowed, the trees thickened, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. I came to another clearing and quickly ducked into the brush, hoping to hide for a moment. The footsteps didn't stop. I stayed still, crouching behind a large tree, trying to control my breathing. After what felt like forever, I heard them get closer. They were almost within reach, but they didn't step into the clearing. They stood, still, waiting, listening. I realized then what they were doing. They were trying to get me to make a move. They knew I was hiding. I stayed silent, forcing myself to remain completely still. My muscles were twitching with the urge to run, but I couldn't make a sound. After what seemed like ages, the footsteps faded into the distance. They didn't follow me any further. I waited until the sounds were gone before I took off running, not stopping until I reached the parking lot. When I finally got to my car, I was shaking, too scared to look over my shoulder. I kept glancing at the trees, expecting to see someone emerging from the shadows. But no one ever did. I drove home as fast as I could, my hands gripping the wheel. I didn't let myself relax until I was safely inside my apartment. I still don't know who they were or why they followed me, but I can't shake the feeling that they were just waiting for the right moment to catch me. The air was unusually still, and a heavy silence filled the space. I opened my eyes and squinted into the darkness, immediately sensing something was off, though I couldn't quite figure out what. I reached for my flashlight, which I kept by my sleeping bag for moments like this. That's when I noticed something strange. My sleeping bag was missing. The space next to me, where it should have been, was empty. Just bare ground. My heart began to race. I didn't remember getting up, nor could I think of any reason it would be gone. I sat up quickly and scanned the inside of the tent. My backpack, which contained extra layers and gear, was still there, along with my jacket and boots by the door. But the sleeping bag was completely gone. Panicked, I threw back the flap and rushed outside, hoping to find some explanation. The ground was soft from the rain the previous night, and I immediately saw muddy footprints leading away from my tent. They weren't mine. They were too large, too deep, and they weren't heading toward the campfire, which was still smoldering faintly from earlier. Instead, they led into the trees, as though someone had come to my tent, unzipped it, and taken my sleeping bag. But why? And who? Part of me wanted to panic, but I forced myself to stay calm. I was alone, miles from the nearest ranger station, and charging after whoever had taken it wasn't an option. The footprints continued deeper into the woods, away from the trail, not where other hikers would be. I grabbed my backpack, shoved my phone inside, and zipped it up. I was shaking now. This wasn't some prank. Someone had been here, and they were still close. I could feel it. I knew the first thing I had to do was get out of there. Forget the sleeping bag. I just needed to reach my car. It would take hours to hike back out, but I couldn't stay here any longer. I packed my remaining things quickly and glanced around one last time. The silence was suffocating. I started walking toward the trail, sticking to the edges of the clearing, moving as quietly as I could, though my boots made loud crunching noises on the wet ground. Every snap of a twig made me jump, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced I saw movement in the trees. But when I looked, there was nothing. The farther I walked, the more I felt like I was being watched. It was still dark out, and the trail was hard to follow in the low light, but I couldn't go back to the campsite. This path would eventually lead me to the road, and from there, I could make my way back to civilization. I just had to keep moving. I couldn't afford to stop. Then, I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and not far behind me. Someone had taken my sleeping bag and was following me. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to look. I just kept walking, my breath quickening, my legs aching with every step. The trail twisted, and I came across an old, broken-down fence that I had to climb over. I didn't care about the scratches on my hands. All I cared about was getting out of there. But when I climbed over and looked back at the trail, the footsteps had stopped. I stood frozen, straining to hear something. Anything. Silence. I was alone. At least, that's what I tried to convince myself. But the unease in my stomach wouldn't let me relax. I moved a few more steps, then stopped again to listen. No more footsteps. No sound at all. The air felt thick with tension, like the entire forest was holding its breath. I moved faster now, no longer concerned with being quiet, just desperate to get out of the woods. The trail narrowed and the trees closed in around me, but I kept my eyes on the path ahead. There was nothing behind me anymore, just the echo of my own footsteps. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the parking lot. My car was the only one there. I didn't care about the car. I didn't care about anything except getting inside and locking the doors. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys, but I finally managed to get in. When I started the engine, I didn't look back. I didn't want to see anything. I just drove, not knowing who had been out there or why they'd taken my sleeping bag. Maybe they were just a random person looking to mess with a solo hiker, but something tells me that's not the case. I don't know what they wanted, but I'm never going back out there. I didn't think anything was wrong at first. When you camp alone, you tend to get a little paranoid. The wind rustles the leaves, and every creak in the trees makes you jump, but I was used to it by now. I'd been camping alone for years. This time, however, felt different. I had been at the campsite for a couple of days already. The hike up had been quiet, and everything seemed fine when I set up camp. I was far out of the way on a ridge with a decent view, and I figured I wouldn't be bothered. That was the plan. some peaceful time alone, away from everything. The first night passed without incident, just the usual sounds of animals moving around. I cooked a simple dinner and watched the sunset over the mountains. The second day, though, that's when I started to feel strange. It wasn't anything obvious, just little things like how the wind stopped completely around noon. There was total silence, which could be normal, but it felt wrong, like the air was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, grabbed my pack, and went for a hike around the area to stretch my legs. I didn't see anyone else, which was typical for that part of the park. I came back to camp a few hours later, and everything seemed the same. Nothing disturbed, nothing moved. But I still had that feeling that something was off. I decided to go to bed early that night, hoping to shake it off. I crawled into my sleeping bag, trying to relax and listen to the crackling of the campfire as it slowly died out. The forest was calm again. The wind had picked up a little, but nothing unusual. I eventually fell asleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke up thinking I'd heard something. It wasn't loud, just enough to pull me from sleep. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe an animal. But then I noticed the silence. It was too still, like the forest was holding its breath again. I lay there wide awake, staring at the tent walls, straining to hear anything. No animals, no wind, just quiet. I tried to brush it off and went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, made my coffee, and decided to explore more of the area. The weather was nice, and I thought a short walk might help clear my head. But when I stepped outside, something caught my eye. Muddy, fresh tracks in the ground leading straight to my tent. I froze. I wasn't paranoid enough to think someone had come into my camp, but I knew I had been the only one around for miles. The only tracks I'd seen were mine from when I set up camp. But now, these were deep, clearly fresh, and the mud was still soft from the rain the day before. These footprints had to have been made within the last couple of hours. I crouched down to take a closer look. The prints were odd, too big for any animal, and much too large for any boot I recognized. They looked like they were made by a bare foot, but the toes were strangely spread, like someone had really dug their foot into the mud. The size was bigger than any human print I'd ever seen. The tracks started at the edge of my campsite, right by the tree line, and led directly to my tent. There were no other tracks nearby, no sign that anyone had been walking through the area before. It was as if whoever made these prints had appeared out of nowhere. I felt a cold chill creeping up my spine. Something wasn't right. My instincts screamed at me to pack up and leave, but I wasn't ready to freak out over a few strange footprints. At least, not yet. I decided to follow the tracks. They led me around the back of my tent, circling it a few times. The footprints got deeper, as if the person had been pacing around the tent. The more I examined them, the stranger it seemed that the tracks didn't stop at the tent. They circled all the way around. Then I noticed something else. The flap to my tent was unzipped, just enough that the zipper was halfway down. I knew I had zipped it completely when I went to sleep. My heart started racing. I wasn't sure what to think. Was someone out there? Had someone been in my tent? I couldn't make sense of it. The place was isolated, and I hadn't heard anything. Still, my mind was racing. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe the wind had caught it. But nothing added up. I stood there, trying to calm myself down. I knew I had to check inside, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I stood there, staring at the tent, waiting for something, anything, to explain what had happened. But nothing did. I finally walked over, unzipped the flap, and peeked inside. Nothing seemed disturbed. My sleeping bag was still there, and my gear was untouched. But that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I glanced back at the prints again. They were still going in circles around the tent. My gut told me someone had been there, close to my tent, watching me. I packed up my things quickly, not bothering to be neat. I was ready to get out of there. The more I thought about the situation, the stranger it became. The tracks, the pacing, and the unzipped tent. All of it was unsettling. Whoever had been there had been watching me, perhaps for hours, and by the time I packed up, I was certain they knew I'd seen the footprints. They could be watching me now. As I finished gathering my things, I felt an urgency to leave. The air was thick, almost suffocating. I didn't care about the camp or the gear I was leaving behind. I just needed to reach my car and feel safe again. As I walked down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was following me. But when I finally reached my car, I looked back at the mountain. No one had followed. I don't know who or what had been there, but I'll never forget those strange footprints. They were too deliberate, too out of place. I don't think I'll ever return to that spot. I never thought much about being alone in the woods until that moment. I had camped solo plenty of times. It was one of my favorite activities. The solitude, the peacefulness. It was exactly what I needed. So when I decided to take a weekend trip, I didn't expect anything unusual. I picked a spot I'd been to before, a quiet corner of the forest near a lake. It was a bit of a hike from the trailhead, but not too far. The area wasn't heavily trafficked, and I liked the idea of getting away from it all. The weather was perfect when I arrived, cool with a slight breeze. I found a good spot near the lake, tucked away enough to enjoy the view without feeling exposed. The ground was soft enough to stake my tent into, but not muddy. It felt like the ideal place to set up camp. While I was pitching my tent, I heard a branch snap behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. Animals are always lurking around when you're camping. But then, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Unlike the quick scurrying of animals, they sounded like human footsteps. I turned around, expecting to see another camper, maybe someone passing through. But instead, I saw a man. He was in his early 40s, tall with a scruffy beard, wearing a worn backpack and clothes that suggested he had been hiking for a while. He didn't look like he was from around here, more like someone who wasn't used to the woods. He stood there for a moment, just staring at me. I felt uncomfortable, but I brushed it off. People hike through these parts all the time. Maybe he just needed a break. "Hey," he said flatly, "you need to move." I blinked at him, confused. "What? This is my spot." He repeated himself, more firmly this time. "I've been coming here for years. You need to pack up and leave." I looked around, trying to understand what he meant. There was no one else in sight, no tents, no signs of anyone else having been there recently. I'd been hiking for hours, and hadn't seen another person. "I don't know what you mean," I said, trying to stay calm. "I'm just setting up. I haven't seen anyone else around." He didn't respond, just stepped closer. His eyes narrowed. "Doesn't matter. This is my spot. You're not welcome here." Something about his tone made my skin crawl. It wasn't just a request. It felt like a demand, like I had done something wrong just by being there. I took a step back, scanning the area. No one else around. Just me and this guy. "Look, I'm just camping for the weekend," I said, trying to reason with him. "There's plenty of space. You can pick another spot." He shook his head slowly. "No, this is mine. You've got to go. I'll make you." I felt a growing sense of unease. I've camped alone before, but something about this guy's demeanor felt off. It wasn't just his request, it was the aggression behind it. It felt like he was trying to intimidate me. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, trying to sound confident. "This is public land. You can't just claim a spot like that." He didn't blink. His eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, I thought he might charge at me, but instead, he just stood there, silent, as if weighing something. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. You won't be able to sleep here tonight." I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked off into the trees, his boots crunching on the ground. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Was he just crazy? Did he think he owned the forest? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I continued setting up my tent, trying to push the situation out of my mind. But the unease lingered. I kept hearing small noises in the underbrush, twigs snapping, rustling leaves. Every time I looked up, there was nothing there. It felt like I was being watched. As the evening wore on, I started a fire, hoping it would help me feel safer. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows in the growing darkness. That night, I heard footsteps again, slow and deliberate. The sound came from somewhere close by. I tensed, staring into the darkness. But when I shined my flashlight around, nothing was there. The sound stopped, and the rest of the night was unnervingly quiet. I didn't sleep much, every little noise setting me on edge. By morning, I couldn't wait to leave. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking. There was no sign of the man, but I didn't feel safe staying there any longer. The woods, which were supposed to be a peaceful escape, now felt like a place of danger. I didn't want to find out what would happen if I stayed. As I walked back to the trailhead, I kept glancing over my shoulder. There was no sign of anyone, but that lingering dread was still there, creeping at the edges of my mind. Whoever that man was, I don't think he ever planned on letting me stay. I was a few miles into my hike when I saw the fire. It wasn't anything spectacular, just a small glow flickering through the trees. But it stopped me in my tracks. I had been hiking for hours, and the sun was beginning to set. The woods were quiet except for the rustling leaves and occasional bird call. I had planned a solo hike to clear my head, nothing fancy. The trail wasn't heavily trafficked, which was perfect for me. I liked being alone. But as I hiked, I started to notice little things that felt off. The wind seemed to die down in certain areas, and the trees felt a little too close, like they were leaning in. So when I saw the fire, I thought it was just a group of campers. I didn't remember passing anyone else on the trail, but I figured they'd show up eventually. I approached cautiously, not sure what to expect. The closer I got, the more strange it seemed. The fire wasn't in a designated campsite, just a random patch of dirt surrounded by trees. There were 6 people sitting around it, hunched forward, staring into the flames. None of them spoke. No laughter, no chatting. Just silence. I tried to act casual, hoping they wouldn't notice me too much. But as I walked past them, I could feel their eyes on me. Not just quick glances, but all of them staring at me. It wasn't normal. I quickened my pace, pretending not to notice, but my heart started to race. I was more than halfway past them when I felt it. Someone's eyes on the back of my neck. It wasn't just one person, it was all of them. I didn't look back, but I could tell they were watching me, every move. Something felt very wrong. These weren't ordinary campers. There was something off about them. There was an eerie stillness in the air, an oppressive quiet that made me feel like I didn't belong. As I passed the last person, a woman sitting near the edge of the fire, I could have sworn I saw her lips move, but it wasn't like she was speaking. It was as though she was trying to say something without making a sound. I paused for a moment, trying to understand what I was seeing, but she quickly looked away, returning her attention to the fire. I resumed walking, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to brush off the unsettling feeling and keep walking. There wasn't much daylight left, and I needed to find a place to set up camp, but the encounter stayed with me. The silence, the way they all watched me, and the strange, almost silent gesture from the woman. It was as if they were waiting for me to do something, for me to turn around or engage with them. The woods felt different now. It was hard to explain, but the air seemed heavier, and the trees felt like they were closing in around me. My footsteps echoed too loudly, and it felt like I was disturbing something. I tried to focus on the trail ahead, but the feeling of being watched never left. Then there was the quiet. It was unnervingly complete. The birds had stopped calling and the wind had died down. I reached a clearing and decided it was as good a place as any to set up camp. But as I unpacked my gear, the thoughts of the strange group kept circling in my mind. Why hadn't they spoken to me? What were they doing out there, all alone, staring at the fire? The questions kept nagging at me as I worked quickly to set up my tent. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the woods were growing darker. I lit my campfire, hoping it would provide some comfort, but it didn't. The same heavy silence hung over everything, and the woods felt wrong. I didn't want to sleep too early, but as the darkness deepened, it felt almost suffocating. I stayed by the fire for a while, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, and that the group of hikers I'd passed was nothing more than that. Just another odd bunch of campers. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I kept hearing faint sounds from the woods, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, as if someone or something was moving just outside the reach of my firelight. I glanced toward the fire I had passed earlier, and in the distance, I thought I saw the glow again. This time, there was no crackling of flames or movement, just that eerie stillness. I stood up, trying to shake off the unease, but the feeling that I wasn't alone persisted. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But as the night grew darker, the sense of being watched only intensified. I'm not sure how long I stayed awake, but eventually I felt compelled to check my surroundings. As I moved toward the edge of my camp, I thought I heard something. A faint whisper, too soft to make out. It sounded like someone was speaking. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I quickly returned to the fire, my mind racing. I couldn't sleep, but I wasn't about to venture out into the woods in the dark. I just sat there, watching the flickering flames, trying not to think about where the group had been earlier. The rest of the night passed in a blur of tension and unease. I didn't hear the footsteps or the whispers again, but the feeling of being watched never left. When morning finally arrived, I packed up my camp quickly, not daring to look back as I left the area. I never saw those people again, and never figured out what they were doing out there. But I've never felt the same sense of discomfort in the woods since, and I don't think I'll ever be able to shake the feeling of being watched. I've always enjoyed hiking alone. There's something peaceful about being out in the wilderness, surrounded only by trees and silence. But that trip changed everything for me. I had planned a solo hike in a remote part of the forest, a trail I'd been meaning to explore for a while. It was far enough from the nearby town that I didn't expect to run into anyone, and that was the point. I wanted solitude, a break from everything. I packed light, just enough food for a couple of days, a tent, and the usual hiking gear. I didn't even bring my phone. I wanted to be disconnected from the world. The first day was perfect. The weather was clear, the skies were sunny, and the trail was beautiful. I felt at ease, alone in the woods, with no one else around. I camped in a small clearing, set up my tent, made a fire, and enjoyed the quiet. No one came by, and I appreciated that. The next morning I woke early, made coffee, and packed up my camp. I planned to hike a few more miles before turning back. But as the day wore on, the trail began to get harder. The sun was still up, but the further I went, the denser the trees became, and the quieter it grew. It's strange. When you're out there, you get used to certain sounds. The wind through the leaves, birds calling. But suddenly it just stopped. Not all at once, but gradually. At first, you don't notice. But eventually, it feels like you're the only person left in the world. I tried to push the unease away, thinking it was just the time of day, or maybe fatigue setting in. But the trail was starting to feel unfamiliar, like I was walking in circles. I kept looking over my shoulder, but every time I turned around, there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By the time I decided to turn back, the sun was starting to dip below the trees. I figured I'd return to camp, grab my stuff, and head out the next day. It wasn't far, maybe an hour or two at most. But when I got back to my camp, something didn't seem right. The fire pit was in a different spot, and my tent was slightly off-center. At first, I thought the wind had moved it, but then I noticed something else. My gear was gone. My tent, sleeping bag, food, everything was missing. It was like someone had taken it. I stood frozen, staring at the empty spot where my things had been. The only thing left was the campfire, still smoldering faintly, and a crumpled piece of paper lying where my bag should have been. I walked over and unfolded it. The message was simple. We'll be back for the rest. I stood there trying to process what was happening. The wind had picked up again, but there was no sign of anyone. The forest was eerily quiet. As I looked around, I saw fresh footprints leading away from my camp. They weren't from a trail. They came from the woods themselves. They looked recent, deep enough to leave a mark, but not muddy. Without thinking, I followed them, my heart racing with every step. The deeper I went into the woods, the more the hairs on my neck stood up. I felt as if I was being watched, even though there was no one around. The trail twisted and turned, taking me farther from my camp. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought it was a prank, maybe a hiker messing with me. But the further I went, the more I realized how wrong I was to follow those tracks. They led me to a small clearing, and there it was, my gear, piled neatly in the middle of the clearing. My tent, sleeping bag, and backpack, all arranged as though someone had placed them there on purpose. The sleeping bag was open, as if it had been used. My backpack was unzipped, and my food was gone. I stood there, staring at it for what felt like forever. And then I heard a branch snap. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one. Just the wind in the trees. I didn't stick around. Panic set in, and I turned to run. My legs felt heavy as I bolted back toward my camp. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer, but every time I turned around, I saw nothing. I made it back to my camp and grabbed whatever I could. I didn't stop running until I reached the parking lot. The silence of the woods felt like a weight on my chest, but I didn't care. I never went back to that trail, and I don't think I'll ever forget that feeling. That sense of being hunted, even when no one was there. Maybe it was just another hiker's prank, but deep down, I know it wasn't. The note, the footprints, the way everything was taken, but the message was left behind. That wasn't normal. It was supposed to be just another solo trip, a weekend in the woods to get away from everything. But it turned into something I'll never forget. The first day went smoothly. The hike wasn't too challenging. The sun was shining, and the air felt fresh and invigorating. Everything seemed calm. I set up camp in a secluded spot near a stream, far off the main trail, ensuring I'd have some peace and quiet. After unpacking and setting up my tent, I spent the evening watching the fire flicker as I ate, enjoying the tranquility. It was peaceful, maybe too peaceful. Night fell quickly, as it often does in the woods. The temperature dropped, and the sounds of the forest became sharper. I added more wood to the fire, trying to stay relaxed, but a nagging feeling settled in. Something didn't feel quite right. There was no specific cause, just a subtle sense that I wasn't alone. I brushed it off. Easy enough to do when you're deep in the wilderness, convincing yourself it's just your imagination. I crawled into my tent around 9 p.m, zipped it up, and tried to get some sleep. It didn't take long before I drifted off, but in the middle of the night I was jolted awake by a sound. Rustling. It was faint at first, just enough to make me stir. I assumed it was an animal. Maybe something small moving near the camp. The wind had picked up a little and I figured it was just the leaves blowing around. But then the rustling came again, and this time it was closer. Then silence. I froze, my heart racing. The kind of feeling you get when you know something is wrong, but can't figure out what it is. I lay still, straining my ears for any other sound. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then the rustling came again, this time right outside my tent. I held my breath, staying as still as I could. I could hear the crunch of dry leaves. Someone or something was moving around my tent, too close. I tried to come up with a rational explanation, telling myself it was just a deer or a raccoon. But the rustling didn't stop. It continued, slow and deliberate, like someone was trying to move without making a sound. My mind raced. What was going on? The rustling stopped at last. I thought maybe whatever it was had moved on, but then I heard something else, faint but unmistakable. A zipper being pulled open. My food bag. I had hung it outside my tent to keep it away from animals. I froze again, holding my breath, terrified to move. I waited in the dark, my eyes wide open, straining to hear anything else. Then it came, a sharp snap, like fabric being cut, followed by a muffled thud. That was enough. I couldn't stay in that tent anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, holding my breath and trying to be as quiet as possible. My heart was pounding, and every muscle in my body was tense. I unzipped the tent just enough to slip outside. The cold air hit me all at once, and the moonlight barely lit the clearing. There was no movement, no animals, no people, just the wind. Then I saw it. My food bag hanging from a tree branch, swinging slightly in the breeze. The bag had been sliced open, the contents spilling onto the ground. Granola bars, dried fruit, and snacks scattered in a pile. It was clear someone had deliberately cut the bag open and taken what they wanted. I froze. My first instinct was to run, to grab my things and leave. But fear paralyzed me. Who would do something like this? Who was out there? I scanned the area around me, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the trees. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Then I heard it. Footsteps, distant but unmistakable. I couldn't tell how far away they were, but they were coming from the direction of the trees. I squinted, trying to make out any shapes, but I saw nothing. The steps were slow and deliberate, like someone was trying to stay quiet. Someone was out there, close. I snapped the flashlight off, my heart racing. I had to get back to my tent, grab my things and leave. But my legs felt like lead. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, everything went silent. I could hear my own breath, and my chest felt tight. I had to leave. I ran. No hesitation. I grabbed whatever I could find, my sleeping bag, my backpack, anything. And I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot. Panting and terrified, I had no idea if anyone had followed me, but I didn't care. I never went back to that trail. I haven't camped alone since. Whoever or whatever was out there, cutting open my food bag in the middle of the night, I didn't want to know their intentions. I just knew that I was lucky to make it out in one piece. It started as a simple solo camping trip, a weekend getaway to get some peace and quiet. I've done it before, no problem. It was a Friday evening when I set up camp by a small lake. There was no one around for miles, just the sounds of birds and the occasional rustle of leaves, perfect for a solo trip. I cooked a nice dinner by the campfire, then crawled into my tent around 9:30. I made sure to avoid looking at my phone too much. There was no service anyway, and just listened to the sounds of the night. Everything felt peaceful, calm, the perfect night. I must have drifted off to sleep eventually, but I had a strange dream, or maybe more of a half-dream. I remember hearing footsteps, but I couldn't make them out clearly. A whispering wind, a rustling in the brush, then silence again. I didn't wake up though. My brain was processing the sounds, but I didn't acknowledge them consciously. Then, out of nowhere, I woke up. It wasn't a sound that woke me up, but more like an instinct, a gut feeling. You know that feeling when you wake up and you know something's off, but you can't quite figure out why. Like something isn't right. I opened my eyes and immediately felt it. That eerie sense that I wasn't alone. Moonlight filtered in through the mesh window of my tent. At first, I thought it was just a tree branch moving in the wind, casting a shadow. But when I focused, I saw something else. Someone standing just outside my tent. I couldn't make out their face, just their silhouette. They were so close that I could see the shape of their body against the dim light, but there was no detail. I stared, trying to make sense of it. My heart was hammering, my breath catching in my throat. Maybe it was another hiker who had gotten lost. Maybe they just wanted help or wanted to talk. But then I realized they weren't moving. They were just standing there, perfectly still, watching. I held my breath. For what felt like forever, neither of us moved. I couldn't tell if they were looking directly at me, but I could feel it. There was no sound, except for the rustling leaves and the faint chirping of crickets, as if everything had gone still. "Hello," I said quietly. No response. I shifted slightly, trying again, louder this time. "Hey, can I help you?" Still, nothing. No movement, no sound. I felt a sickening knot in my stomach. This was wrong. I didn't know if it was just a confused hiker, or if this person had been watching me for a while. But either way, I didn't feel safe. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on. It barely made a dent in the darkness, but just enough to catch their silhouette for a split second. I swear I saw them move slightly, but they still didn't speak. I felt frozen, trapped in a panic loop. Should I call out again? Should I grab my things and leave? Should I talk to them? My mind raced. The longer I stared, the more I felt like I was looking at a statue. Someone who was just there, not responding. The feeling shifted from confusion to dread, and I couldn't shake the growing unease. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that maybe they couldn't hear me, or maybe they didn't know how to approach a solo camper. But the longer they stood there in silence, the more terrifying the situation became. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out again, my voice trembling. Still nothing. Panic crept in. I wasn't sure if they were ignoring me or if they weren't human at all. I gripped the flashlight like it was my only lifeline. The silence outside felt suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I had to leave. I grabbed my boots, ready to leave. Slowly, I unzipped the tent, trying not to make noise. I poked my head out, shining the flashlight in the direction of the figure. Nothing. I looked around, my heart racing. They were gone. No trace of anyone near my tent. I stood there, confused, trying to make sense of it. Then, I heard it. Footsteps, soft but unmistakable. Someone was walking away from my camp. I didn't wait to see if they came back. I grabbed my bag and bolted, not even thinking about leaving my stuff behind. I ran to the car, heart pounding, praying I wasn't being followed. Never went back to that spot, and every time I think about it, I can't shake the image of that person standing there, silently watching me in the dark. Whoever they weren't a normal hiker, and they weren't someone I ever wanted to meet again.